Hi, second graders. I wanted to start reading a book out loud to you. I have read Charlotte's Web to every second grade class I've had since I've been a teacher. And this would be my 28th year of reading this book in the spring to my students. So I'm just sitting in my basement. It's just me and the book, and you guys listening when you want. My only listener is that nice bass over there that came home from the cabin that we had as a family and just sold. So thought you would just like to tune in when you need to and hear the story Charlotte's Web. It's a really good one to read in the spring of the year because that's when the story starts. The book was written a long time ago, like 1952. So I would guess even your grandparents were little in the 1950s. So there's going to be some things I'll explain as I go. But it is a wonderful story about friendship. And those are the two that are friends, as well as the pig and the tiny little character right here. Which, if you know anything about this story, because it's been made into some movies, that's Charlotte. All right, chapter 1 is called Before Breakfast. Where's Papa going with that axe? Said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. Out to the hog house, replied Mrs. Arable. Some pigs were born last night. I don't see why he needs an axe, continued Fern, who was only 8. Well, said her mother, one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it. Do away with it, shrieked Fern. You mean kill it, just because it's smaller than the others? Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. Don't yell, Fern, she said. Your father is right. Pig would probably die anyway. Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. Please don't kill it, she sobbed. It's unfair. Mr. Arable stopped walking. Fern, he said gently, you'll have to learn to control yourself. Control myself, yelled Fern. This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself? Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. Picture. Fern, said Mr. Arable, I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along. But it's unfair, cried Fern. The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me? Mr. Arable smiled. Certainly not, he said, looking down on his daughter with love. But this is different. Little girl is one thing, a runty little pig is another. I see no difference, replied Fern, still hanging onto the axe. This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of. A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. I think what they're trying to tell us is the father, Mr. Arable, is just, he can't seem to make his daughter understand what he's trying to do, and he is at his wit's end and feels like crying about it, kind of like being so frustrated. All right, he said, you go back in the house and I will bring the runt in when I come. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be. When Mr. Arable returned to the home, half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. Put it on her chair, said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink, washed his hands, and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were red from crying. As she approached her chair, the carton wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father, then she lifted the lid off the carton. There inside, looking up at her, was the newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its ears, turning them pink. He's yours, said Mr. Arable, saved from an untimely death. And may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness. Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. Oh, she whispered, oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect. She closed the curtain carefully. First, she kissed her father. Then she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Before we get to Avery, I got to tell you that when I was a little girl, we had pigs on our farm. And when the newborn pigs were born, you could hold them, and they were the sweetest, softest, warmest little thing. And you could feel their hearts beat inside of them through their entire body. And they were really sweet. Their little noses were so wet and soft, and I liked it too. I never kept one though, but I had them on my farm. Okay, here comes Avery, the boy. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed, an air rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. Here's Avery. What's that? He demanded. What's Fern got? She's got a guest for breakfast, said Mrs. Arable. Wash your hands and face, Avery. Let's see it, said Avery, setting his gun down. You call that miserable little thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat. Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery, said his mother. The school bus will be here in half an hour. Can I have a pig too, Pop? Asked Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Arable. Fern was up at daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. As a result, she now has a pig. A small one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. Just shows what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig, had a drink of milk. Mrs. Arable found a baby's nursing bottle and unrubbed a nipple. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipple over the top, and handed it to Fern. Give him his breakfast. I know the light's not so good down here. I had to find a quiet spot to read today. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor in the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. Run, commanded Mrs. Arable, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. Just so you know, kids back in those days, bringing a gun along wasn't really a wrong thing to do. Of course, we don't do anything like that these days, but this was country kids a long time ago. The children ran out to the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the others in the bus. She sat and stared out the window, thinking what a blissful world it was and how lucky she was to have an entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached school, Fern had named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. Its name is Wilbur, she whispered to herself. She was still thinking about the pig when the teacher said, Fern, what's the capital of Pennsylvania? Wilbur, replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. That's the end of the chapter. The next chapter is called Wilbur, and I will have that one ready for us the next day. Bye.